Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pivot Point podcast, where we bring together business leaders, innovators, and industry thinkers for candid conversations about the shifts redefining customer experience, AI, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Alok Ramsisaria, CEO of Gazette Interactive. Gartner recently reported that more than half of all customer service journeys now begin on third party platforms. That's Google, YouTube, ChatGPT, rather than your company's own website. And only 22% of customers complete their entire service journey using a company's own channels. At the same time, 51% of customers say they're willing to use a generative AI assistant on their behalf to interact with customer service. These shifts raise an important question. If customers increasingly expect answers before they ever reach your support team, how should organizations rethink the digital customer journey? To discuss this shift, joining me today is Scott Wilder, one of the most respected voices in digital customer success and self service strategy. Scott currently serves as the global head of digital self service at LastPass, where he heads digital customer engagement across onboarding, education, AI, knowledge management, communities, and customer success. Over the course of his careers, I've had the privilege of knowing him across many leadership roles at Intuit, Marketo, Clari, Adobe, HubSpot, and Google, helping organizations build scalable customer experiences that drive adoption, retention, and long term growth. Beyond his corporate leadership, Scott is also a sports coach and leader in baseball, soccer, ice hockey, and a mental performance coach, where he helps individuals, most noticeably his sons and their teams, unlock peak performance. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you on the Pivot Point, and let's get started with the bigger picture.
Thank you for inviting me today. I was thinking about this morning. I think I've known you for 3 decades. Is that possible?
It's just time compression, Scott. We got to know each other at Marketo.
Yeah, we were very young when we started. I think we were like in our teens.
That is true. I would love to think like that.
It's all here, mental performance. It's all in the mind.
I agree. My dad is 86, and I met a guy who's about 40. And I was telling him, we young folks should hang out together. He says, you feel young because your dad is 86 and still around, right?
Well, there's a lot of truth in that. There's that perspective, right? So, where you are in your environment is really important. So, if you're with somebody who's 80 and you're in your 40s, you feel young. It's if you're 40 and you're with your kids, you feel okay. Maybe I'm moving on in years. And I think the
Excellent.
perspective, it is kind of a weird segue to the discussion is, one of my big things is about perspective is even though we're in the digital world is engaging with customers in person or on Zoom and really understanding them. I always tell this story about when I was working at Intuit, which Intuit really influenced me a lot in my career. I met with Scott Cook, who was the founder of the company. The company was earlier. And I'd go into his office thinking I'm a cool, well-educated MBA guy. And I'd have my Lotus spreadsheet or my Excel spreadsheet. And he would basically put it in the trash and say, Scott, tell me what the customers are saying in their own words. And I think, we'll talk more about this later on, because even in a digital world, maybe increasingly so now because of LLMs and because of other things, is understanding how your customers talk about your product and the language they use.
I agree. I think, so it's interesting, while we have all of this technology now available, and, we look at customer support and success, we look at metrics, but it's really, I personally believe it's the human connection, but, everybody else who's trying to sell you a solution, whether AI or digital, should leaders rethink what success looks like? Should the objective be eliminating the need for customers to seek help altogether, rather than simply making the support more efficient and empowering the human connect?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, the technology is here, AI is here. It reminds me, you know, many last century when people were saying the internet's going to kill us and this and that, but it's a big part of our daily lives. And I think AI, obviously, we're seeing that right now. But the human connection is really important, if not for learning about your customers, but also for your own personal health as well. But yeah, I think the human connection is really important because, customers, they relate to a brand, they relate to a company. If you can humanize that experience, I think it's going to create more engagement. I think it's a challenge for companies, right? A lot of companies are a little robotic in their engagement. But there are things you can do from a human element, or there are things you can do to humanize the experience. And don't forget, your customers are human, and they're also reaching out to other humans to learn about your product.
So, but segueing into what the world is talking about is, how do you, we are saying put the human connection at the center of your interaction, but then what should you do in the digital connection? What are you? What should we be building in the digital journey? Because we are seeing this sort of yo-yo between customers investing in communities, customers pulling back. Sorry, companies pulling back from customer communities. Some customers are doing a lot of work in education, knowledge management, and they're buying the bots to do AI powered self service. But really, the experience may not be seamless, right? So on the digital side of the journey, while we put the human at the center, I think let's just part that we both agree that it should be the human at the center of the journey. But what about the rest, right? How do you organize the digital customer journeys? What are the best principles to design these journeys? And what separates organizations that, in your very varied experience, uh, those that are really empowering customers to succeed independently so that they're freeing up time to do better on the part of the human, right?
Companies, first of all, the journey starts on the unowned properties that you don't own versus properties you do own. And organizationally, many companies, I'd say almost all the ones I work at, have the person who's working on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram is not necessarily the same person as the community person. And you'd love to say in this perfect world, that we all talk to each other, but that doesn't always happen. So I think organizationally, you need to ensure those groups that work on properties that you don't own are interacting with the properties you do own. So that's one thing. And there's different ways to set up organizationally. Two is, we talked about LLMs and a lot of conversations and search. So really thinking about the LLMs, and I basically, my playbook is based on the 3 C's, which is content, citations, and community. And so you're saying, well, community, what about community? So let's just break that out a little bit. So we all know, or a lot of us know, that LLMs depend on Reddit and other communities. So the content on those communities is really important. The content is coming from people posting questions and answers. And you as an organization person can build relationships with those people to help accelerate the content, right? So you can be active on a Reddit, you can be active on a LinkedIn, you can be active on YouTube. So the first thing is how you're set up organizationally. The second thing is thinking about unowned versus owned properties. The third thing is that engagement that you have on those communities is really important, and how do you foster that? The question was about the digital journey, and I think a lot of companies will go every January, they'll go into a conference room or on Zoom, and they'll map out the customer journey. And this has happened at every company I've worked at. You can look at my LinkedIn resume, and I'm not trying to brag, but you can see the big names there. This happens at every company. They map out the customer journey, they do it once, and then nobody ever refers back to it. It's like, it just sits there, and I call it in the virtual closet, and it doesn't come out ever. So I think when you're mapping out the customer journey, it's really important to, the next principle is being really simple. Just pick a few touch points. I think the next principle is, when people are hired as a digital scale person, and that's why, they tend to focus still a lot on email, right? And again, so you have the email, a lot of this is organization, a lot of this thinking. So you have these people in digital scale, and 80% of their programs is email. And they're not thinking about, for example, in-product messaging, or very few are, or it's another person maybe who controls that as well, right? So I'm just like these, instead of saying this is how you map the journey, I'm just talking about these different areas to really think about, and just, I could keep going, but just to kind of summarize, there's the organization aspect, there's the unowned versus owned properties. It's integrating the human communication, human connection on other sites as well. And I think the last one is your ecosystem, right? So your ecosystem of influencers. I love acronyms, so I call it the CIA. So community champions, influencers, and advocates. Map out where they are they're engaging as well. So that's kind of like the whole front end experience, and then there's the data experience. And so on the data side is customer success, increasingly getting more money and all that. But the customer success tends to look at a health score, but the health score does not include any digital touch points. Most of the time, it doesn't say how many people have talked to me in the community into that health score, right? I mean, that's a huge signal. And again, the companies I worked at. So I think, when you're looking at health scores, you need to include the digital signals as well. And then I think the last thing is, I talked about language, and I'd love to talk more about this, is understanding, like what we do at LastPass is I look at all the cases that come in. I look at all the G2 reviews. I look at all the LinkedIn posts, and I actually am extracting key messaging, what the customers are saying on each of those, and then using that on all the platforms I use. So the example is, and I know I'm talking a lot here, some of our marketing material a few years ago had the term one to many. Mm-hmm. What that meant was to share. No customer says, hey, look, did you one to many this today? They ask if you shared it. I mean, it's a small nuance, but if you can look at how customers are talking about your product, the same way Scott Cook asked me about it, you can integrate those learnings into your posts, into your content, which will help drive the customer journey.
I agree. I think you're saying keep it simple. Let me just summarize. I think there's a lot of pearls of wisdom there. Keep it simple. Just look at some touch points. And did you say that don't think just email is your only method of communicating, right? Think about all the methods you can communicate, especially look at in-product messaging as a way to reach out to people. That's a very powerful way, rather than just looking at and the CIA acronym, I think, works very well: community, influencer, and advocate. I think one other thing you mentioned was that people don't really use the data, especially customer success doesn't use the data accruing from measuring conversations. For example, on public forums like Reddit or on communities. And that is an important signal that one should rely on. But I mean, there's also this entire amount, we're drowning in data, if you ask me. Right? Product telemetry is throwing up data, and I'm just playing devil advocate here, right? You know me more than anybody else. There's support interaction data, there's product usage data, there's the community discussion that you mentioned. Right? There's a whole ton of data. Now, I think the good part, and I think sort of prepping this, you hinted this: take all of that data, dump it into a warehouse, and then run your LLM to actually extract what's happening and answer specific questions about. Is that the correct way I'm thinking about it?
So definitely, I went on, but definitely keeping it simple and focusing on three or so platforms is first. But yes, so in terms of the data point, you can extract that data, whether it's numeric or alpha, like in conversations, mm-hmm. and bring it into your data warehouse. And, just from a KPI perspective, pick 2 or 3 KPIs you want to focus on. When I look at community, I have this huge dashboard, but I only look at 3 numbers, right? And I don't even look at growth. I mean, I know growth is important, and that CEO will call me if growth tanks. But I look at participation rate, and I look at the number of posts and answers by non-employees. Those are 3 numbers I look at: participation rate, and whether or not a non-employee, meaning a customer, is engaging, right? Number of posts, number of answers. I just look at those. But all the data that come into this, warehouse, and then I also will, when we launch a product, for example, or we change something, I do look at the language that customers are using to talk about, like what how the beta testers talked about it, or a similar feature. We have a feature called the Vault. So I'll look at how people talk about the Vault, not us. I'll look at how our customers talk about Vault. So those are just like 2 or 3, there's 3 or 4 things that I do, right? So there's all this noise here, to your point. But I just look at the engagement numbers, and I always have done that. And and since I was schooled by Scott Cook, I look at the words that people are saying. And that's been, my playbook. What do they say? Rinse, lather, repeat. Yes, that's my rinse, lather, repeat playbook. I mean, I can answer, I can get to the data if somebody asks me some, obscure thing, but I really try and stick to those few things.
Okay, now let me come to a pet peeve I think both of you and I share. And especially since you came from the Marketo days, where Marketo socialized that it's good to spend on acquisition. And if you think about it, the community at Marketo used to be, I've actually heard people say that, hey, I bought Marketo so that I could be on the community, right? The learning of the community was driving the acquisition. But typically, most organizations underinvest in the post-sales process, right? Marketing used to be the sexy department, and customer success is right, or customer support or account management. That's you have to put up with them. In general perception, right? Has that changed? Number one, right? Do you think that companies are now focused, realizing that hey, customer acquisition is just maybe 15-20% of the journey, and really it's the advocacy piece and the influencer piece that's going to drive your growth? Are companies adequately investing in the post sales journey process, experience, rather than investing in the the marketing motion?
So you're saying that they're investing more in the pre-sales.
That used to be the case earlier, right? Especially during your Marketo days. But I'm saying today, with all the learning and with all the how should I put it, the all post realization that hey, 85% of the business is still coming from the regular customers that you acquired maybe a few years ago, right? While marketing can drive some more of top line, but really most of your business is coming from, and it's those who are going to be, if they're champions, influencer, or advocates, that's going to drive much better success than spending on marketing. Do you think that flip has happened inside companies?
I don't think it's happened enough. I think when we were talking the Marketo days, maybe if I had $100, $30 would go to post sales, and $80. You can see I'm not a math major. $30 would go to post sales, but $70 would go to pre-sales. So it's getting closer, but I still think there's not enough energy put into, and not enough resources into the post sale process. And maybe that's because where I work, where I am, what I focus on. But I just see so many companies. I mean, call your bank, right? So many companies that just kind of drop the ball on the post-sales process, whether it's number of people, or whether it's, yeah. I mean, it's funny, the whole LLM discussion so, when companies come to me, it's focused a lot on top of the funnel.
Yep.
Very little conversation on the bottom of the funnel. And so I'll say, well, that long tail is really important, and you need to, I'm using the long tail analogy because of, SEO. But you need to really think about how LLMs are picking up your how-to information, like what customers are asking about. But I can tell you, there's, 3 or 4 companies that, I advise or whatever, and the conversations are always on top of the funnel when it comes to LLMs. And that's just a classic example. It doesn't cost a lot to think about how you can drive more citations, more, references on LLMs for that bottom of the funnel content. And this is a pet peeve of mine. And the tools are also set up that way. When you meet with the sales team, and for some of these AEO tools, conversations always focused on top of the funnel. And when I look at the analytics, so it's not how I think. I think I have somebody at my party. I better make sure they have a good time, because otherwise they're not going to come back to the party.
I agree. In fact, if you look at Graziti's growth over the years, we've grown purely because customers have liked or loved working with us and taken us into new companies, present company included. Right?
It's a great example. So, I worked at Marketo, had a great experience with you guys. I left Marketo and I went to another company. And when I left that company, I said, you should look at, Graziti. And then that's happened 2 or 3 times. And exactly, if you take good care, I think that this is a really key point here is, companies don't really look at referral revenue.
Yep.
Right? They're looking at, okay, they're looking at the initial dollars, and then maybe they're looking at ARR and lifetime value, but they're not saying Scott came in, as a customer at Graziti. How do we make him happy because of what he can say later on, right? How he can spread the word. It's an interesting thing, because I never kind of thought about referral revenue, but or I haven't thought about it recently. But that would be a good metric to start companies to start tracking.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think referral revenue is a great example, and just classifying customers. I mean, it's the same way that we classify top of the funnel, right? Visitor, suspect, prospect, and then you move people down. I think if we spend that much amount of money, and interestingly, we have much more data about these guys, right? Because we have actual data about who these people are. We're not trying to second guess with some kind of third party tool and saying, who's the guy who came to my website? You know exactly who this guy is. You know what he's interested in. He's using a tool, so you know how he's using your tool, or using tools like yours. So if you invested more analytics in understanding user behavior and getting the signals and then translating that into, so referral revenue could be one such metric. Could there be other such metrics that we should look at for the post-sales journey that you think companies should track? And I know I'm segueing a little bit, but I get a chance to pick your brains.
It's something we built at Marketo using the Guide platform, which has been a little difficult to duplicate. And that was a long time ago. So when I was at Marketo, I would basically automate when somebody went to look at a certain product that Marketo had, that signal would trigger an email to the CSM, right? So if somebody looked at, a product, a feature called Vault, and it would send a signal to the CSM saying somebody from Autodesk looked at this feature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you can quantify that and track that. But I think that's a really, these customer touch point, these different platforms that you have, if you can pull those signals and send it to your sales team or your CSM, your customer success manager, I think is really important. but I haven't been able to, in most companies, do that again, just because of whatever reason. Gainsight is probably in the best position to do it because, the CSMs are already in their product, and then they have an inside or their community as well. But Salesforce and their communities and their CRM, they don't do that. My previous companies don't do that.
Yeah, I think Marketo did a lot of good stuff, if I remember correctly. You also built that experts marketplace long time back, and I think owning the space, if you will, right? One is obviously the tool software that you're working in, but everything apart from that should be in one customer portal, right? And that customer portal will then give you a lot of insights. The challenge today is that customer portal has exploded because people want to go on public forums. But if I could give you a customer portal which allows you to, let's say, post on Quora or Reddit or whatever is your tool of choice, I think that you would get the signals, right? Even if people are doing public posts, because the public monitoring solutions that are out there, I think they sort of exaggerate the signals more than something which you would control. That I've seen platforms which will go 3x to 10x what the actual signal power was. But if you can control where the interaction is happening, let's say somebody is checking on your renewal status inside your portal. Okay, so it's a signal. Any interaction with any artifact that happens on your platform. So I think your vision at that time, I think it's the same thing we should think about, and it should be much easier to build on that nowadays with all these co-work and coding tools available. But if you come back to, so I still want to give our viewers some, don't want to get them a feeling that we just enjoy a concrete set of steps that they should do today. So one you mentioned, measure the referral volume, right? What other metrics, 2 or 3 metrics that you think, if you think if that one is sufficient, then that's fine too. But if there are other things that they should track and start looking at the post-sales journey and say, okay, if we are improving here, we are doing much better. Obviously, referral is the top of the heap. That okay, you're generating new business, right?
Yeah. So, from a platform perspective, my playbook I tend to use over and over. So at Clari, we created, I think it was called Clari Central, and at LastPass, we created LastPass Central. And what we've done is we've thought about the whole self-serve experience starting at one place, right? So we've integrated the support articles, education, community, etc. From a customer perspective, this makes sense, right? Because they have one place to start their journey, and then they can search or browse. But it also helps your internal employees because they don't have to go to a customer and say, well, you go here for support, you go here for community, you go, right? So the principle here is to have that central customer-facing portal. 2 is, I talked about the engagement data, pulling in all those signals and assigning scores to those. And in the last few months, I've had 3 different people calling me about how they're building a tool to do that. You don't need it. Basically, if you have the data going into a data warehouse, then you can use an LLM, and you can say, I want to weight my community post 3 points. I want to weight somebody reads an article 2 points, right? And you can build an engagement score that way, right? So there's referral, there's the referral revenue, there's centralizing platforms, and then there's kind of the scoring of all touch points. And if you can even pull in external as well, if you want, there's some tools where you can do that.
Great. And you also mentioned, folks who answer, right? Real experts like we built for you earlier back in the day. Is that still an asset that should be?
Yeah. So what I learned at Intuit, so Intuit is one of the keys to success is its accountants. Mm-hmm. Every small business needs an accountant. So Intuit really focused a lot and still does on the ecosystem of accountants and making sure they're happy, making sure they're using their products, etc. When you think about the answer people, it's the same thing, like to identify those people on your platforms or other platforms who are providing answers, and then figure out how you build engagement with them. And you could even track when they're making referrals as well. I mean, here's just a tip. There's many companies that are answering questions on Reddit, but how you can say, well, Reddit, I don't really know who that person is because they have a username. But how many people are actually sending DMs to the person answering the question and trying to build a relationship with them, right? So that's something we're really trying to do. So yeah, the whole ecosystem, or I use the acronym the CIA. So maybe you want the CIA on your side. Really thinking about who's in your ecosystem, who are those answer people. So we track the number of answers each person is providing on the community. We look at the answer people, what they're referencing as well. So and part of this is training, like, if you have a champions program, you can, educate them on the new content you have. We do a lot of things at LastPass to make sure that our answer people are up to date on the other self-serve content.
Great. So going again back into where we started, where you mentioned that the onboarding journey now doesn't start, Gartner's statistics that I mentioned. The customer journey doesn't really start on your platform. It will start on Google. So would you want to summarize your thoughts around what companies should be doing to be on top of this, summarizing all that we've discussed today around the importance of the post-sales journey and how to think about it, maybe.
Yeah. So I think, the post-sales journey, or even any customer engagement, increasingly it's starting on other platforms. I mean, I would start with in product when they become a customer, and also, LLMs or Google AI overviews. And I would just pick two. Like, there's 4 or 5. Just pick two, right? Start simple. Those two spaces, right, the in product and then the LLMs, is a great place to start about, top of the funnel activities. And you can even use them for then the onboarding, and then you can also use them for once they become a customer, right? I'm already a customer of Apple, but a lot of my Apple questions I now ask on LLMs. I don't go to the Apple community. So I think that's one place to start. I think the second thing is figure out how you can aggregate, curate, centralize the user experience in terms of information. So I talked about LastPass Central as a hub for it. Even though we're in a digital world, I really spend a lot of time on analyzing the language that people use, right? So, we get, X number of cases every month. I look at all those cases using tools and really pull out the common terms, common phrases. I analyze, are we answering them on the community in such a way that it's optimized for LLMs? So, right, so I'm pulling that customer's words, I'm analyzing it. Now the moderators are trained to understand what the words people are using, and then they're trained how to optimize their responses to customers for LLMs as well. There's I don't want to go off track too much, lots of stories, but so those are just 3 simple things to start with, right? Think about, the journey starts often away from properties that you own on LLMs. And then once you become a customer, there's a lot you can do in product. I think we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of in product messaging, right? Because it tends to be the same message in a lot of cases for right? Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, I agree. I think as a segue, and a former developer, all the messages used to be generated by the developer, and they would then get reviewed by somebody who was a business analyst, but not really from a marketing or sales perspective. I think so. That is a completely untapped opportunity, I think, that people should look at. So to summarize, I think the key theme is that you have to put the human connection at the center, but use AI to understand all the channels, because the journey is not going to start on your platform, it's going to start outside. And you can leverage the tools that are provided. Look at post sales metrics like customer referrals, customer interaction, and again use AI to digest and surface the actual terms and the actual language that customers use to describe the interaction, whether it comes from a support case, whether it comes from a community post, whether it comes from a public forum, and look at the language. I think that's the key insight. I think, Scott, I would like our viewers to take away from this conversation. And I think what AI and LLMs today enable is the ability to do that at scale. That was very hard to do, 5 years ago, maybe. So thank you once again for being part of Pivot Point. A pleasure having you with us. And for our viewers, thank you for watching Pivot Point. Any last thoughts that you would want to leave our viewers with, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, you can always, first of all, it's great to see you again. You can always, anybody can just send me a message on LinkedIn. That's the fastest way, just a DM message. And I try and answer all those messages. But more important, yeah, I mean, the human connection, it's a human connection, but also, they talk about a growth mindset where you're learning always. You can always learn from your customers. And one of the ways to learn is to look at the language they're using, to understand how they're talking about your products. And then that will translate into what translate into your LLM strategy, into what you do on communities. And even you can use that in product. But we'll talk about the product stuff next time.
Great. Thank you so much once again, Scott. Thank you for watching Pivot Point, folks. As technology continues to evolve, conversations like these help us better understand where business is headed next. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you and take care.